Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
A privilege again, and probably the seventh or eighth time I've had the opportunity to interview this man at either speaking engagements or radio, and always grateful for his time. David Parkin, good morning, and thank you again for giving up your time for us.
Oh, that's okay. Thanks, gentlemen. Yeah, plenty of time.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. Look, it's been a tough week for obviously you personally, but a tough week for the game because there's characters that float in and out of our game, and some of them are flamboyant and they leave different sort of marks. But this fella, along with probably Tommy Hafey and Alan Jeans, two people that also, like John Kennedy, just left an incredible mark on the game and did it with humility and credibility all the way through. A great man and clearly a sad loss for you personally.
Yes, well, that's a good description of a person who was revered by those who worked under him as players, and he was a coach, and those who worked with him as colleagues, and I was fortunate enough to do that as well. But he is a unique individual, including the Tommy Hafeys and the others, Alan Jeans, etc., who left a similar mark, but I didn't have the same relationship with them that I had with John. Met him in 1959 or 60 when I was recruited to Hawthorn, and a friendship, a lifetime friendship and influence developed from that, and I was privileged to be able to provide a eulogy on behalf of all of those players that were coached by John, and it was a very long and very demanding and extremely sad day for me a couple of days ago. Yeah, it's been a tough time. I'm not a weakie when it comes to that sort of stuff, but this man, other than my parents, I would have thought influenced who I became and the pathways that I went down and the things that we were able to achieve collectively. So very special. You've got it right, Robbie. Very, very special human being in the broader sense. And if you listen to what his two sons and daughters said at the funeral, you would understand the impact that he made simply as a father and a human being. And they're rare people, Rob, you know, these days. They're rare people who are sustained an influence over, well, he's not his 90 years, but certainly 70 of those 90 years. It was a magnificent legacy that he leaves.
Yeah, David, the media was a lot different in 1959, obviously. So you've walked into the club as a wide-eyed, probably 17 or 18-year-old. Did John Kennedy have a reputation at that stage that you were aware of, or did you really just walk in cold and meet this man?
That's a good question. No, I had no idea, and you can understand that the club was in pursuit of its first ever premiership. I walked into a culture and an atmosphere that was absolutely committed to achieving the goal. It wasn't very pretty. I'd have to say they worked harder. Kennedy's Commandos is a very good description of our training. It wasn't terribly strategic or skillful, but I'll tell you what, it was pretty physical, and the fitness and power and strength and that these players developed was unbelievable. Set a pattern. I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure that he was the first, including Tom Hafey and those, to actually take players down that pathway, and they played football accordingly. As I suggested, he wasn't, you would call, a technical or strategic or tactical coach in any shape or form, but his ability to, I don't know, it's inspire, but his oratory, pre-game, during the game and post-game was second to none. I was always in the front row and getting a bit of Karl Marx and a bit of the Bible and a bit of Churchill, and we got all of those elements in his addresses which impacted on me as a wide-eyed, bushy-tailed young bloke who was, you know, wide open to suggestion, etc. And so how, in time, just in sheer time, I was a local boy, didn't like Hawthorn at all. I was a passionate Melbourne supporter, still buy my ticket for Melbourne because that's where my love of the game started. But the best thing that could have happened to me in terms of both my normal and full life, but particularly in relation to my football life. So how fortunate I was, and just to have the phone calls and texts and emails from teammates of mine, you'd be surprised, Rob, and they're all saying and trying to say the same sort of things about their lives, and I've met nobody, to be truthful, nobody else in the world, and I've met some really good people who've made the kind of personal impact, professional effect on people.
So, David, it's Neil here, and thank you for joining us. The thing that I've learned about John in the last few weeks, in fact, ironically, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, they replayed the open mic conversation that he did with Mike Sheehan.
Oh, right, yep.
And the fact that when he walked through the door as a young man, and he literally walked through the door because he lived around the corner, it was one of those days where, you played with your local club.
Yeah, yep.
Hawthorn were a basket case. They hadn't won a game. They were just hopeless. And to get to where they got to when you walked in the club, clearly he played a critical role as an on-field player as well. So he wasn't just a master coach. He obviously was an inspirational player on the ground. I'm far too young to remember him. But is that the sense that he's had every impact that he could possibly have on the club? Yeah,
look, I think that's true. He won 4 best and fairest, but as he said about himself, one of his mates came to see him play, invited him to come and see him play, and he talked to him after the game. He said, "Well, that wasn't very pretty." John was not the most skillful or technical player that ever played, but he played the game. I remember him well. He played the game exactly the way he coached afterwards. It was an extension of his personality, single-minded, no excuses, team focused and centred in every decision that he made, never anything selfish, as you've already suggested. Probably in the circumstance, the most humble man I've ever met. He hated the accolades in a public sense, always diverted that to the team and the players and the club. And for all of us, we get a bit, I've been down that pathway too, you get a bit big-headed about who you are and the impact that you're having, but you could never, ever suggest that John was self-centred or self-fulfilling person at all.
Now, David, I remember the vision of you, I think, were one of the people who was trying to cheer him off the ground in the 1971 grand final celebrations, and he literally fought many of you to avoid that. It was amazing.
Yeah, no, that sort of sums him up perfectly. He changed the subject immediately if it got round to focusing on him as a person or the role that he was playing. Very few people that probably you and I have met in our lifetime who have done and achieved remarkable things don't take some of the kudos and public accolades, but that just wasn't John. And it came out clearly in the eulogies that provided by certainly his 2 sons and daughter was quite moving to hear, and the grandchildren too. Young Josh, who was unable to come to the funeral from Sydney, sent an email, and it was a number of pages long. Josh is a pretty quiet bloke, doesn't say much in a public sense, and it went on for ages about the impact that this man had had on him as a young boy, and it would have been, I guess, letters. Yeah, they were letters that were written between the 2 of them over their early years, and it was quite remarkable that he could recall it all, and the comments that were made and his answers to John's questions, etc. So I know, unfortunately, my grandchildren probably won't think the same way about me when the time comes on, but it actually alerted me that maybe I've got 2 of my grandchildren with me at the moment. Maybe it's time that I did some of the things that impact on the family and the close people too. So, yeah, look, it's remarkable, and I'm pleased that it's had the impact publicly because he was such a private person. But I'm just pleased that this has come out. You two are leading the way in it as well, and a recognition of a pretty unique and special person.
And, to be momentarily self-indulgent, I met John once. I was involved in the 2003 Auskick Coach of the Year Awards, and they were held at the MCG. I think you were there that night as well.
Yes, I was, yep.
And I had my award presented to me by Alan Jeans, and as a bit of an anti-Hawthorn supporter, I've got to say, you were very much the Fitzroy coach. Forget about anything you did at Hawthorn. And the people who'd been nominated were sitting on a table away from, can I say, the dignitaries, and there were 4 or 5 tables of dignitaries, people who were reasonably big names in footy. And John got up after each award was announced, came over to the table and shook hands with each one and had a word with each of us. And I remember what he said to me. He said, you know what, my job's really easy. I've got 30, 40, 50 really talented footballers. You've got 30, 40, 50 kids, half of whom don't want to be there, and you're not getting paid a cent. Keep up the good work. It's things that you do that help me when the time comes. Now, that cost him nothing to do. But and that was, 17 years ago. I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah, and that underpins who he was. I mean, that's a great example of John Kennedy.
And he insisted on a photo with us too. That was the other thing. So one of my treasured memories of my involvement in footy has been the photo with John. It was just extraordinary.
David, there's something else that probably says a lot about John Kennedy, but you were a player for him. You were his captain in a premiership side and then came up through the ranks, became an assistant coach. But it would be fair to suggest that although influenced heavily by John Kennedy, your coaching style embraced some of the parts of the game that perhaps weren't natural to him in your coaching style. The manner in which he allowed you to do that must have been very humbling for you as well.
Well, first of all, the handover, which very few people knew. I was his assistant. I went to Perth and coached Subiaco for a year and came back because of a job offer which I couldn't refuse. That was at Deakin University, but I became his assistant in 76. At that stage, young Bernard was causing some real difficulties for the family, his young handicapped son, and I did most of the work in 76 to be preparation of the team and started to introduce some very different ways of preparing and playing, etc., which I'm not sure that John tolerated all that well, but he acknowledged that maybe the game was changing, that there are other ways of getting the result. And as it happens, they won the premiership in 76, Hawthorn. In March the following year, so this is 1977, in March, after a training run at Stradbroke Park, so we're just about into the 77 season, I walked across to my car with him as we finished training. He went and put his stuff in the boot. I'll never forget this. And I just closed my boot and went to, get in the car. And he diverted and he walked over and he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Oh, by the way, Dave," he always calls me Dave, "by the way, Dave, you'll be announced as the coach of the Hawthorn Football Club tomorrow." And then nothing else, didn't say or do anything else, got in his car and drove off and left me standing in the car park. And that happened the next day without any interview, without any pre-discussion or thing. I became coach of the club. And he stayed around for the 77 year. We mucked it up. And I had a quiet conversation with him after 77 that we agreed that it was time for me to go on my own. And we were fortunate enough to win the premiership in 1978. Now, that is, a class act if there ever was one.
Yeah.
And we certainly went about our work in a very different way. I was a very different thinker about the game than John and a different preparer. But I can remember, and you'd appreciate this, that the boys came to me in 76 and said, "Look, we're sick of doing circle work, and we do circle work, and then we do contest circle work. So we go round and round and round. The game's played up and down, mind you, but we go round and round and round in our preparation." And the boys came to me and said, "Look, you've got to get to him and get, the training's not right, and we've got to get some changes here." And I said, "Oh, good luck." I said, I'm not going to be the person who does that. So, but we're going round and round. I'm getting dizzy going round and round. And I opened my mouth and I said, "John," I said, "the boys think it'd be a good idea if we brought a bit of variety into training." He said, "Variety?" He blew the whistle. He said, "Take the ball the other way in the circle." That was the variety. That was the variety we got. So we were, at opposite ends of the pole. But he he understood, intelligent man, he understood that the game and the need for a change of preparation and method of play was essential, and was able to walk away and give me his job. That doesn't happen very often in our game.
Well, there's been some really interesting examples of that since then that have been anything but smooth and humble, haven't they? And of course, we shouldn't forget he also then went and did a stint at North Melbourne and introduced some fairly handy players as debutants. So there was a fella called Carey who apparently went on to do a few things at North. Stevens, those guys, Archer, they all came through his tutelage as well.
Yep, yeah, that's true. And when I spoke to him at length, he loved his time at North Melbourne. I mean, if you think about the history of both clubs, that's Hawthorn and North Melbourne, they had very similar difficulties. They were adopted into the league at the same time and had very slow development in terms of winning games and then finally winning premierships. And to be truthful, I talked to John a lot, obviously, along the way. He loved his time at North Melbourne. He got a fabulous response, and I was delighted to see North Melbourne people like Ron Joseph and Wayne Schimmelbusch at the funeral the other day. It was just terrific to see, and to hear them talk about the impact he had on them as people and that club.
Just quickly before we go, David, would probably not be an ideal time for you to be plying your craft as an AFL coach. Extraordinarily difficult conditions at the moment, but are you thinking that it's a necessary evil to push on, or are we at the stage where maybe it might be best just to rack the queue?
I think the queue will be, unfortunately, I'm a bit of a pessimist, but I think the queue will be racked by necessity, which is very, very sad. But it's such an important, you would understand as well as anybody, the impact of Australian football on Australian lives, the number of people and the intensity of that. If the game, and I saw a game, the Collingwood-Essendon game last night, whenever it was played with a ferocious intensity. The contest was as hard and as heavy as I've ever seen in a game, and I am amazed that players can, with a lack of time and space, can be making decisions and executing skills. And it was a wet ball last night. I sat there in amazement. I miss, like you and everybody else misses, I miss the long kicks and the high marks and all of those things that made our game unique. But when you see the intensity of a contest, and a really close contest between two great institutions, footy's pretty important. If we can keep it going and keep the interest and morale up and the safety of players and people, I really believe we should, because it's one of those institutions in society that, I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but the reality is it has a massive impact on the population of this country. So if we can, within reason, keep the competition going, I'll be one that would be supporting that.
Good on you. Thank you very much again for your time. Hopefully we'll speak to you again in the future, and I really do appreciate the access that you've given our humble little show here, and good luck to you in the future.
Anytime, guys. It's good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, David.